once again. Today we're going to be working on a Three Sisters Forge Beast in Elmax steel. The customer sent this to me because he kind of messed up the grind a little bit trying to sharpen it himself, and figured it'd be a good blade to demonstrate some reprofile and fixing techniques. It's a rather thick knife, and it's a lot smaller than I thought it was going to be. Seeing these online, I imagine this knife would be much larger, especially in the blade, but it's just overly thick in every direction. Thick frame lock, thick blade grind, thick blade stock. So challenges with that are you have a lot of metal removal down here at the edge, and it appears that there's a little dip in the edge here from the previous sharpening, going a little uneven, and a little bit of rounding near the tip that we're going to try and straighten out right here. Like I said, this is a very thick blade, so it's gonna take a little more work than normal, and it's also going to take a little more of angle control, because the more you want to wobble, the more rounding you'll start getting on your edge. It'll end up really convex if you're not careful. So we're going to go ahead and start on the DMT extra coarse 120 mesh stone. So starting off into it, it's feeling pretty hard. Definitely got a good heat treat on the steel. Which means it'll hopefully grind pretty nice from start to finish. I don't know if you can see it here. See that little reflection right here? That's the spot not being touched by the stone. That's that dip I was mentioning just a few seconds ago in the blade. I'll actually have to work the whole bevel even down to that point to get that out of there. And also, it appears that this might have been on some sort of sharpening system, where the abrasive is held in place and drawn past the edge, because you have a more shallow bevel here and a much wider tip on each side over here. It's also what I'm guessing came the dip in the bevel, as the typical thin stones that come with systems like that. If you rub it even once or twice too much in one spot, you can remove too much steel in that area, really distorting the bevel quite a bit. Now the wide bevel I'm actually going to be able to reduce and kind of equal back out to the rest of the edge, simply because of the way I sharpen. With a guided system where the angle control point back here is fixed, you can't run the length of the cutting surface while you're sharpening it. So you pivot from a point, and when you pivot from a point, as you get further from that point, your angle is going to get lower and lower on the blade, hence the wide tip on the knife. Could have not been sharpened on a system, but typically that's what I see. That's why I'm saying that. That gives you an idea of why something like that may happen. far as difficulty goes, the process like what I'm doing here ranks pretty high in the range of difficulty, especially on a blade such as this that has a misground edge. You end up having to feel out a lot of what you're doing, make corrections on the fly, and grind some areas more than others to get the evenness back in the blade. Got most of the divot out of the edge. Just trying to even out the bevel right now. It's ground much further on this side than it is on this side. And that's also something you're going to need to pay attention to whenever making large corrections in an edge like this. Such little things as this divot that's in the edge right here being on the same side that has the lower grind, you don't want to grind this all the way out first before you grind this side down to where it needs to be. Because once you grind this side all the way down and take this out, now you've overtaken this side even more than what it already was. So as you grind this side, you're grinding back that way against the bevel, distorting this bevel all over again, and on top of that removing more steel than is necessary. I don't use water on my diamond stones all the time. Usually it's only for the finer stones I do it. I just don't feel like drying this one off so much. It hasn't really been cleaned in quite some time, and I use it a lot for lapping water stones, so its life is coming to its end. I've had it for about 4 or 5 years now, and while it still cuts very well and still does the job, I can definitely tell the difference between this and when it was in its new state. So I just had to clean a little bit of the swarf off right there, and we'll leave the water on to collect any remaining swarf that gets pulled off the blade. so we're starting to get this side back evened up with the other side here. I got the bevel to about 70 or 80% of where I want it to be before I need to move on. That's why you see me changing up my grinding style. I'm going back to a little bit longer of a stroke, a little more even, trying to keep everything even as I approach the apex of the new bevel I'm creating. The better this bevel is, the easier the sharpening will be throughout the rest of the process. can see, I don't have a dip in the edge anymore. Not catching the light anywhere. I forgot if I mentioned this, but this is Elmex steel on this blade. I typically sharpen Elmex with water stones, though it's pretty nice to use a diamond stone to get the rough stuff done with. This can depend a little on the heat treat of the blade, though, because there is 3% vanadium in this steel. It might not sharpen very well on water stones if the heat treat was brought up a little higher than normal. Use my 180 grit Nubaton water stone, and we're going to test out just how tough the steel is on this stone. Because if I can't cut it with this stone, it probably won't work with too many of the other ones. And it's working pretty well. Okay, so that's looking pretty good right there. The bevel is fairly well evened out, much better than it was before. We have a nice evenness from the Picasso all the way to the tip on both sides. Bevel grind at the tip is equal. The edge is brought to a nice apex. Now I'm not going to show you sharpness at this point because it's not actually very sharp at all. I'm not very good at getting a sharp edge on my 180 grit stone here. But I will show the sharpness as we progress on up near 1,000 and beyond. Because this is a very hard steel, I'm going to be using a very tight progression of stones. If I didn't, I would have to go back to the diamond stones and continue on with the typical tight progression of the diamond stones. The reason that is because the steel is so hard that if I don't do that, then I would never be able to get the scratch pattern out from the previous stone. I've had some questions on my stones, some comments from some of my other videos, such as, why don't I put a drip of water on the stone as I'm using it, or just more water in general. What if I did? The reason I don't pour a faucet over it and just constantly run water is because mainly it won't help the stone at all. It'll actually make it work in the ways I don't want it to work. You're not going to get the buildup of slurry on the surface, which is helping to polish away the previous scratch marks and refine it more for the next stone that I'm going to use. It's just the way the stone works. If I had a different type of stone, it would work in a different way. But because of the type of stones I use, they mimic natural stones the best, and they work in the same ways. So you have to use a little more effort to get them to work as they should, versus stone like a diamond stone where you just rub the blade on it until the edge becomes sharp. With the water stones like these, adding more water to the surface when not needed, or when your mud is at its highest level of development, pretty much ruins everything you work to achieve. So that's kind of the reason I don't constantly splash water on my stones, and don't run a drip over my stones. Some stones, they need lots of water on the surface, but most of mine are like this, where they're not going to hold a lot of water on the surface, or they quickly develop a mud with that water. Starting to have my doubts at this point. We'll see what happens once I get to 1K and beyond. But this is turning out to be a little bit slow going and tough grinding. It seems like it's working out decent, but we'll see what happens as we progress higher. It's really hard to tell how well something is going along at the coarser grit, because you can't see as much detail in the edge. It's easy to make mistakes and not grind far enough, or not properly deburr at a lower grit. know how well this is going to do. It feels kind of sharp to the finger. Just more of a slice. It'll cut with direction applied to it. But not very well, as you can see. If I did edge trailing strokes and really cleaned up the edge and got rid of some of the impaction to the edge I've created by going forward, it might turn out a lot better. But I'm not really worried about that at this stage. For some, that might seem like a step skipped, or kind of go against what I normally say about sharpening, and that you should be sharp after every stone that you use. But if you know enough about what you're doing in your own personal sharpening, you don't have to make that a goal with every single stone. You can make it a goal by the time you reach a certain stone to have a expected level of sharpness, but you don't have to be paper slicing sharp with every single stone that you use. Obviously, as you get higher in the grit, it shouldn't really be a question, such as this 1000 grit stone. We should be a little better at slicing the paper by the time we're done with this. But with the lower grit stones, I usually don't concern myself with getting that sharp. It's also going to be a little more challenging because of the thickness of this blade. It's going to make actually getting it sharp a lot harder. Steel's been very well heat treated. I actually, something I've come to understand about steels and when they've been heat treated to their maximum potential, in most cases the steel will sing to you when you're on a stone, whether it be a diamond stone or a water stone or an oil stone. Let's see if we can get it to do it again. Right there. Little squeak noise it makes. Typically because the steel is so hard, so near its maximum hardness, that it does that. I don't know why it does that. It's just a trait I've noticed with steels that are of high quality, and premium heat treatment has been done to them. 400 stone. Add a little more water here. Controlling an angle is giving you an issue, or you're just trying to get real precise, I'd recommend that you keep your strokes a lot shorter, like I'm doing right here. What this will do is it'll lessen the distance that your arms have to move, and when your arms move forward and back, they want to tilt like this, back and forth. So the shorter that distance is that your arms move this way, the less tilt the blade's going to have like this, and the more control you can have over it. This is the 1K Nubatama Bamboo Goldstone, by the way. It's a recent addition to my collection. I'm really liking it. It's got a very high grit density, which means it cuts into steels really fast. And it'll cut a lot harder metals, such as this one. It's actually, in my opinion, doing even better than the 400 stone I had here just a second ago. See what kind of slicing we get going on. And okay, a lot better at slicing. So you can see it's coming along nicely. That was that for the 1K stone. And I'm going to go ahead and stop there, and we'll move on to part 2.